Good morning to our 9:30 attenders here in the chapel at Robertson, and to those of you watching online for the 9:30, 11 o'clock contemporary service. It is great to be back. I've been away from my summer break, but now I'm ready to go, and we begin today a really important new series. Let me start with a story. It's about two American soldiers who were fighting in the invasion in Normandy in World War II. They got separated from their unit, and one of the soldiers died. The other soldier did not want to just leave his buddy there, so he carried him to a village where there was a church. It happened to be a Catholic church. He found the priest and asked for permission to bury his friend in the cemetery. And the priest asked, "Was your friend, your fellow soldier, a Catholic?" And the man said, "No, in fact, I know he wasn't." The priest said, "I'm so sorry. Only Catholics can be buried in the cemetery." He said, "But here's what I'll do. You can go just outside the fence and you can bury him there." So he did. And he built a permanent marker so that in later years, if his family came there or others, they could find the grave. Well, many years later, that soldier returned to France. He went to that village and he wanted to find the grave of his friend, but he walked all the way around the perimeter of the cemetery. No marker, nothing that even looked like a grave. He found the priest who was in the church at the time. The former priest had long since died. He said, "I don't understand. I buried my friend here years ago during the war. I can't find him now." The priest went and checked some records, and he came back and said, "I think I understand. Come with me." They went into the cemetery inside the fence. They found the grave of his friend. The man looked at it. He said, "Yes, this is the marker. This is the grave as I left it." He said, "I don't understand, though. I know I buried him outside the fence." The priest said, "Well, the records show without any explanation that the priest at the time decided to enlarge the boundary of the cemetery. He moved the fence." He couldn't do anything about the rules about who could be buried in the cemetery, but there was no rule against moving the fence. It reminds me of that poem, Outwitted, the line by Edwin Markham. "He drew a circle that shut me out, heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love and I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in." We begin today a series called "The Church the World Needs." And certainly the world needs a church that draws people in and helps them experience the love of God. But that's not the experience of church for many people. In their book, Why Nobody Comes to Church Anymore, the authors quote research that shows the top 4 reasons people give for not coming to church. These are things people say. The number 1 reason: I feel judged. 87% of Americans label Christians as judgmental. And in the book UnChristian, 91% say Christians are anti-homosexual. Now, if St. Luke's is not going to be that kind of church, we certainly have a lot to overcome in public perception. Number 2 reason: I don't want to be lectured. Number 3, church people are hypocrites. And number 4, your God is irrelevant to my life, but I like to know there is a God and he cares about me. Now, that last one has some hopefulness. Studies show that the vast majority of Americans, close to 90%, believe in God and they believe faith is important in their lives. They just don't believe in church. As Steve Hewitt says, all of the reasons behind why the church is dying in America is centered on the fact that we have lost our ability to love others. So, what does this mean for the church? How do we reclaim our mission to give hope to people who see the church as irrelevant and even opposed to their needs and values? Well, as the old saying goes, when all else fails, go back to the beginning and start over. So that's what I want us to do this morning. I want us to go back to the beginning of the church, to a momentous decision that forever changed the future of the church. And then I want to make some observations about the story and think about what it says to us today. But let me set the stage. Acts chapter 15 tells about the first church council. The apostles of Jesus remained in Jerusalem to sort of serve as a governing body for the sprawling movement of Christianity. Now, up to this point, Christians were still identified as being Jewish. They were believers in Christ, but they were Jewish, which meant they followed all of the Jewish laws until something happened north of Jerusalem in the city of Antioch. In the Christian community that was gathering there, they started welcoming non-Jewish people into their fellowship, Gentiles, something that in most Jewish communities was shunned and in others was punishable by death. So Jewish people began to come into the Antioch community and declaring to the Gentiles that they had to be circumcised first in order to come into the church. Now, that was the defining marker of that time for what it meant to be Jewish. And as you might imagine, that was a deal breaker for a lot of Gentiles. They asked the question, why should we have to change who God made us to be in order to fit into the church? So they sent the question to Jerusalem, and the first church council met. Paul and Barnabas, who were like co-pastors in the Antioch community, came down to give testimony in Jerusalem. They talked about the way the Holy Spirit was as evident in the lives of the Gentile members as the Jewish members, and how they had every right to belong. And after hearing all of the testimony, the brother of Jesus, James, who was operating as kind of the chair of the council, rendered a decision. He said, it seems clear that God welcomes everyone into the church, and we will no longer require circumcision in order to be a part of the community. But, he said, we still require that people follow the sexual purity laws and do not eat foods offered to idols. In other words, we are going to extend the boundaries of grace, but we're not going to let grace mean anything goes. No, grace means everyone is welcomed into the fellowship of God's family in order to experience the life-transforming power of Jesus' love. So what's the significance of that gathering? And what does it mean for us today with the decisions that face the church? For one thing, consider this. The reason that the apostles were able to make such a decision is that they were not yet a church. And that's a good thing. They were not yet an organized body of religion that had time to make rules and regulations and constitutional principles. They were free to make a decision based on what they believed best represented the values of Jesus as they knew Jesus. Now, nothing against rules. Rules are important. They show us how to play well together, and they keep us out of trouble. But sometimes in the church, rules can become an obstacle to grace, and the longer a church exists, the more rules it tends to add over time. The Methodist Church began as a church in America in 1784 at a conference in Baltimore. That's when they first declared themselves as a church, and they printed what became called today the Book of Discipline. After that first conference, the Book of Discipline had 35 pages. Now, over 230 years later, our current Book of Discipline has almost 900 pages. Over time, we tend to add more and more rules to what we do. And again, there's nothing wrong with rules. The trouble is, rules have a way of becoming our religion. C.S. Lewis said there exists in every church something that sooner or later works against the very purpose for which it came into existence. So we must strive very hard by the grace of God to keep the church focused on the mission that Christ originally gave it. That's what the disciples were free to do. They didn't have to consult a book of discipline, but that doesn't mean they were undisciplined. They didn't have guidelines to go by, but that doesn't mean they were without guidance. They based their decision on the Spirit of Jesus. And this is what the church must do today. We face all kinds of perplexities. We face the perplexity of a pandemic in our day. We face social ills. We face divisions within our denomination. But these problems are not too big for Jesus. They simply require us to turn our attention to Him and to fall at His feet and pray, Lord, your will be done. I just returned from the wedding of our daughter Julie in Colorado, and it was a fun time to be with a lot of the members of our family. One afternoon, I was talking with my brother-in-law, Susan's brother, Paul, who's a pastor in Topeka. We were just talking about how tough the last year and a half has been, guiding the church through this pandemic and the racial division in our country and all that's happening in the United Methodist Church. Anyway, Paul said one day this man in his church came to him and he said, I've got a problem with your preaching. I think you're pandering to the modern liberal media and you're pushing politics. And Paul said, whoa, time out. I want to be very clear. I'm not pushing politics. I'm pushing Jesus. And if you can show me how I am not representing the values of Jesus well, please let me know, because that's my first concern. That was the concern of the early church, to represent Jesus. And they were free to do that. And it's what we must reclaim today. What are Jesus' values with all of the things that challenge us? Here's another observation about the decision made by the apostles. They practiced what I call reverse assimilation. Reverse assimilation. When I started out in ministry, assimilation was a big buzzword. We were taught that churches that were healthy and growing had good assimilation processes to incorporate new people into the life of the church. We taught people, not in the church, how we live, the activities we do, the things we believe, how we behave. We assimilate people to become like us on the inside. Now, in Jesus' day, as we heard a moment ago, assimilation meant circumcision. If you want to be on the inside of the church, the entrance requirement was circumcision. I know it only applied to men, but remember, women did not have rights then. What it meant to be accepted was something determined by men. So when the church made a decision to say we're not going to require that anymore, think about what they were saying. They were saying that we will change who we are to reach you where you are. Reverse assimilation. The church assimilated itself to draw people in. Isn't that what Paul was talking about when he said to the Jews, I became a Jew to those under the law, I became as one under the law. To those outside the law, I became as one outside the law. To the weak, I became weak. I became all things to all people, so that by all means I might save some. You've heard it said, you can't be all things to all people, but isn't that what Paul wrote? Isn't that what he's encouraging the church to do? As best they can. to be for the people around them who they are and what they are, so that they can draw them into the fellowship of the church, so that we can all be what we can be through Christ. Reverse assimilation. You know, in St. Luke's for a long time, we've had an open statement. We're an open community of Christians. We welcome everybody in to help people find and give hope through Jesus Christ. But in recent years, we have felt the need to spell out what we mean by openness. And some people say, you know, why do you need to do that? Why can't openness mean openness? That we don't have to specifically name LGBTQ people, that we don't have to talk about people of color. We welcome everybody. And really, the simple reason is this: because in the history of the church, we have named very clearly who isn't welcome. There was a day and time when our book of discipline named that women did not have the same rights and opportunities as men. Do you realize that in the Methodist Church, it's been just since 1952 that we even ordained women to be pastors? In our history, our book of discipline has been very specific that people of color do not have the same rights as white members of the church. Even today, listen to the language in our book of discipline. The practice of homosexuality is incompatible with Christian teaching. Therefore, self-avowed practicing homosexuals are not to be certified as candidates, ordained as ministers, or appointed to serve in the United Methodist Church. Why do we name who we're open to? Because we need to. Because people have been named for exclusion. Some people talk about going to churches that advertise, "We welcome everyone," only to get involved in those churches and find out, that's not quite true. We don't want to be that church. We want to be the church that names specifically so that people know you are welcome. For the sake of our future as a church, we need to wrestle with what does it mean to practice reverse assimilation? To think about everything we do and the way we do it, and how does it reach people where they are so that they know they're welcomed in. Isn't that what God does for us? Did God say, now I'm going to wait until you become a lot more like me to associate with you? Of course not. God became like us and came to us to let us know we have favor with God. One last thought. In this story of the early church and their momentous decision to welcome people into its fellowship, we see that when the church chooses to welcome all, it gives all of us a mission. It gives all of us a mission. Once this decision was made, look at what it says next. Then the apostles and elders, together with the whole church in Jerusalem, chose delegates, and they sent them to Antioch of Syria with Paul and Barnabas to report on this decision. And when they reported it, it says that there was jubilation in the whole community. We have a mission to not just say in here that we're open, but to make sure we get the message out there that we are open and that we welcome all. And that's what makes me so proud of our church here at St. Luke's. It's what brought me here 10 years ago. It's what makes me want to stay here. It's what made me proud that our girls, when they were teenagers, could have the influence of Christianity in the atmosphere and environment that teaches Jesus loves everyone. And there's not a condition on that you've got to change and become something different to be accepted and welcomed into the fellowship of God's family. Oh, my friends, this is life-changing and it is world-changing for people to experience this truth. We started the message hearing from some people who had different kinds of experience with church. Listen now to what those folks have experienced at St. Luke's.
It was about 3 years ago. I said to my husband, we're going to St. Luke's and I'm going to find God. And if I can't find the truth here, then I have to be done.
I was kind of job hunting at the time and found an open position here in the youth department and also at the front desk. And the more I looked into St. Luke's, the more I realized, wait, maybe this is the kind of church that I've been hoping that I would find.
It's been a place for me to begin to heal, to reframe what I believe theologically. I do have kids and they come here as well, and I feel good that they're coming to church in an environment where they are taught to be inclusive of all people and that God's love and His plan is for everyone.
St. Luke's is the model church for what we should be. It is a true sanctuary. It is a place where everyone is welcome, period. No if, no but, period.